I still remember the day I woke up, the cold, sterile smell of the hospital, and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights above me. But before I could even make sense of where I was, I heard whispers. I was confused at first, my mind foggy from the drugs and the trauma, but I could make out a voice. My godson Alex, his voice. It was strange, raspy, almost too quiet. And then I heard the words that I would never forget for the rest of my life. "Can you smother him?" Alex asked, his voice eerily calm. "I'll give you 7% of his inheritance." A wave of cold fear washed over me, even though I was still trapped in the haze of my coma recovery. I couldn't move or speak, but my mind was racing. I wasn't entirely aware of what was going on, but I was certain of one thing. I had just heard my godson offer to pay someone to end my life. And from the way he spoke, it wasn't a joke. There was no hesitation, no emotion in his words. It was as though he was negotiating over some business deal. I later learned that Alex had approached my nurse, Carla, while I was unconscious, practically begging her to assist in what could only be described as a murder attempt. I couldn't believe it. How could Alex, the boy I had mentored, the one I trusted with everything, my finances, my personal secrets, my very life, how could he have fallen so far? Carla, to her credit, was shaken by the proposition. She had worked for me for years, had cared for me during my surgeries, and knew how much my family meant to me. She wasn't some stranger who could be easily swayed by the promise of money. She immediately reported the conversation to the hospital administration, and from there, everything began to unravel. When I came out of the coma, my head was pounding, and my body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. But my mind was sharp, and I could sense that something was wrong, something deep in my gut that told me I had just avoided something far more sinister than a simple accident. That's when I learned what Alex had been up to during my time in the hospital. The first few days after I regained consciousness, I was barely able to process anything. The doctors told me I had been in a coma for weeks, and that the recovery would be slow. But something didn't sit right with me. I wasn't just recovering from a freak accident. Alex had been busy during those weeks, and I would later come to find out just how much he had been plotting. After Carla's report, I started getting pieces of the puzzle. When I was unconscious, Alex had been acting strange. He visited me at the hospital regularly, but no one thought much of it. He was my godson, after all. It was expected that he'd be concerned. But looking back, I now see how calculated it all was. He didn't come to check on me out of love or loyalty. He came to see if I would wake up. Alex had been acting out of character long before the accident. He wasn't the same young man I had taken under my wing years ago. I had always been proud of him. He was sharp, ambitious, and seemed to have a good head on his shoulders. But over the past year, I had noticed a shift. He'd become more interested in my business dealings, asking questions about my investments, and even pushing me to move assets around, suggesting it was for tax purposes. I thought nothing of it at the time. After all, I trusted him. But I began to realize that Alex had been carefully maneuvering himself into a position of power in my life, waiting for the moment when he could seize control. And then there was that chilling conversation with Carla. "Can you smother him?" He had said it so casually, like it was just another request for a business favor. But to me, it was the ultimate betrayal. When the nurse told me about Alex's offer, the pieces started falling into place. His obsession with my wealth, his involvement with questionable people in my business, and now this attempt to hasten my demise. It was all connected. He wasn't interested in my well-being, he was interested in what he could gain from my death. His 7% offer wasn't a casual figure. It was a carefully calculated number, probably based on the inheritance he would stand to receive once I was gone. I had always been the one to take care of Alex, to guide him through life, to give him the opportunities he never had growing up. I had treated him like a son, trusting him with everything I had, even my most private financial affairs. And this was how he repaid me, by attempting to have me killed? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been blind to his true nature, and in that moment, I felt both betrayed and betrayed by my own judgment. In the weeks following, I tried to piece together everything that had happened while I was out of commission. Carla was a godsend, but it was clear that the damage had been done. Alex was no longer the boy I had raised. He had been corrupted by greed, and now his plan was unfolding before me. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not now, not ever. As the days went on, I became more determined. The thought of my own godson plotting my demise was too much to bear. And so, I began my own investigation. But first, I had to regain enough strength to confront him, because I was going to find out the full extent of what Alex had been planning, and I wasn't going to stop until I had the truth. The truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. Little did Alex know, the moment I woke up from that coma was the moment his fate was sealed. In the months leading up to my accident, everything seemed fine on the surface. I had always considered myself close to my godson, Alex. He was like a son to me. We'd shared countless conversations, had meals together, and I'd watched him grow from a young boy into a man with ambition and drive. But over the past year, I began noticing subtle changes in his behavior, things I chose to ignore at the time, chalking them up to life's natural ebbs and flows. In hindsight, those small signs were the first cracks in the facade of the relationship I thought I had with him. It started with the late-night phone calls. At first I assumed it was just work. Alex had always been a go-getter, always hustling for new opportunities, new projects, and investments. It was part of what I admired about him. But over time, I noticed a shift in the topics of our conversations. We used to talk about our family, our shared history, and the things we enjoyed together, football games, family vacations, and even future plans. But now, more and more, our talks centered around business, specifically my business. He'd ask questions that felt oddly invasive. How are your investments looking? Is your portfolio diversified enough? You know, Uncle, I've been working with your financial advisor lately. Maybe we should sit down and discuss your retirement plans. These conversations seemed innocent enough at first, but the tone was different. He wasn't asking out of genuine concern. It felt more like a subtle push to get me to consider something. And while I didn't think much of it in the moment, I now realize that Alex wasn't just looking for advice. He was positioning himself. The conversations grew increasingly frequent, almost as if he were trying to get me to open up about things I'd always kept private. He started asking me for advice on specific investments I'd made, trying to probe into the more personal and confidential areas of my finances. But it wasn't just that. There was a sudden interest in the real estate holdings I owned, some of which were high-value properties in the desirable areas. Alex had never shown interest in any of this before. Sure, he knew the basics, but his sudden obsession with the details made me uneasy. I tried to brush off these thoughts as paranoia. After all, he was my godson, someone I loved and trusted. But then came the gym sessions. Out of nowhere, Alex started going to the gym more frequently. He'd never been the most fitness-focused guy, but suddenly he was spending hours working out every day. I'd joke with him about it, teasing him that he was finally getting into shape, but he'd just smile and change the subject. There was something about his responses that felt rehearsed, almost like he was hiding something behind that confident grin. Soon after that, he started spending more time with my financial advisor, Jeff. Now, Jeff had been with me for years, handling my portfolio, managing my investments, and making sure everything was in order. I trusted him implicitly, and I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. But when I casually mentioned that Alex had been meeting with Jeff more often, I noticed a flicker of discomfort in Jeff's face. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it caught my attention. The look didn't last long, and Jeff quickly recovered, offering a polite explanation about how Alex had simply been curious about estate planning, and how he might want to get involved in some of my future ventures. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I saw Alex, he seemed more distant, more preoccupied with something I couldn't put my finger on. It wasn't like the Alex I had known for years, the one who had come to me for guidance, the one who had looked up to me as a father figure. Now he was starting to feel more like a business partner than a family member, and that shift made me uneasy. I remember one evening, shortly before my accident, we had dinner at my house. It was just the two of us, something that hadn't happened in months. We talked for hours, but instead of the usual lighthearted discussions we used to have, this conversation took a darker turn. Alex was unusually serious. He spoke of future plans for my company, about expanding and growing the brand. He mentioned how important it was for my assets to be protected, how I should start thinking about the legacy I wanted to leave behind. "Uncle, you need to be smart about this," he said, his voice low and almost conspiratorial. "You've got a lot to lose, and if you don't make the right moves now, you could leave a lot of it on the table." It was said with such urgency, with such a knowing look in his eyes. It was as though he was trying to sell me on something, trying to make me see that I was running out of time. At the time, I just nodded, not wanting to upset him. But now, after everything I learned, I can't help but wonder if that was his way of planting the seeds. He wasn't just concerned about my business's future, he was thinking about his future, about how he could secure his piece of it. I began to realize that Alex wasn't the same person I had trusted for years. His ambition had morphed into something darker, and the seeds of betrayal had already been sown. But even with all these signs, I never imagined the depths to which he would go. The fact that he was willing to do whatever it took to take control of everything I had, including my life, was beyond anything I could have predicted. Looking back, I can see that all of these moments, his obsession with my finances, his strange behavior, his desire to push me into certain decisions, were signs of a much deeper, more calculated plan. Alex wasn't just trying to take over my business or my assets. He was trying to take over my entire life. And at the time, I had no idea how close I was to losing everything. Now, I know that these were the final moments before everything fell apart. The pieces of Alex's plan were slowly falling into place, and I was too blinded by my trust in him to see it. Little did I know, in those last few months before my accident, Alex was already plotting his next move, one that would change both of our lives forever. I woke up in the hospital room with a sharp, aching pain in my chest and the stinging dryness in my throat. My vision was blurry at first, my mind foggy from the effects of the coma. I didn't know how long I had been out, or what had exactly happened, but the first thing I felt was a deep sense of confusion and unease. As the nurses began to speak to me, their voices were distant, as though muffled by a thick veil. I could barely comprehend the words, but I knew something was wrong. There was an unsettling silence that seemed to hang in the air. The truth hit me in a rush. The night before I slipped into the coma, everything was fine, normal. I'd been at my office working late on some final details for a project. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed, with tubes and wires attached to me, surrounded by doctors and nurses. But why? What had happened? Why was I here? The last thing I could remember was an innocent dinner with Alex, discussing business plans and the future of my company. Then, nothing. Just darkness. I asked about my godson, Alex, but my questions seemed to irritate the medical staff. They wouldn't give me much information, only that he had been around, visiting frequently. Something about their responses felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it yet. It wasn't until later that day when my lawyer, Dan, arrived that I started to piece things together. He wasn't there for a casual visit, and his somber expression told me everything I needed to know. He sat down beside me, his face drawn with concern. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his voice full of urgency. I had no idea what was going on, but something told me that whatever had happened while I was unconscious was far worse than I could have imagined. Dan hesitated for a moment before speaking, clearly weighing his words carefully. "Alex, he's been up to something you need to know." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen Alex in days. I hadn't spoken to him since the night of the dinner, and I could only imagine what kind of chaos had been unfolding behind my back. Dan continued, his words carefully measured, but heavy with implication. "Alex has been manipulating you, your business, and your wealth. He's been plotting to take control of everything." At first, I couldn't believe it. I trusted Alex with everything. He was like a son to me. How could he be involved in something so sinister? But as Dan told me more, the reality began to sink in. It turned out that while I had been unconscious, Alex had been working behind the scenes, trying to take over my life and my business. One of the first things I learned was that Alex had been secretly meeting with my financial advisor, Jeff, even more frequently than I had noticed before. Jeff, the man I had entrusted with my assets and investments for years, had been feeding Alex information about my portfolio and real estate holdings. I couldn't believe it. I had thought Jeff was loyal, but now I saw that he had been complicit in Alex's plan. It was all part of the scheme to get access to my wealth. Dan revealed more disturbing details. Alex had been working on paperwork, documents designed to shift ownership of my assets into his name. There were transfer forms, contracts, and legal papers that I had never signed, yet they bore my name, forged with shocking precision. It was clear that Alex had been planning this for months, slowly setting the stage for a hostile takeover of my life. The entire time I'd been in a coma, Alex had been positioning himself as the rightful heir to my empire, all while I was powerless to stop him. The worst part was that it wasn't just my finances that Alex had been targeting. He'd been orchestrating a far more complex scheme, one that included the manipulation of medical staff and even the alteration of my medical records. Dan informed me that Alex had been in contact with several doctors, trying to push through decisions that would have sped up my recovery, but for one reason. He wanted me to wake up at the precise moment that suited him. He needed me to regain consciousness in time to sign over my assets to him. The thought that Alex could have been so callous, so calculating, made my stomach churn with disgust. As the days passed, I began to learn more about the extent of Alex's betrayal. He wasn't just interested in controlling my wealth. He wanted it all. He had been trying to rewrite the terms of my business's future, convincing key investors that I was no longer fit to manage my own affairs. He had even convinced some people that I was incapable of making decisions due to my medical condition. What hurt the most was the realization that Alex had been playing a long game, and he had used my vulnerability to exploit me. While I was lying in that hospital bed, he had been preparing to seize everything I had worked my entire life for. All those years of trust and loyalty meant nothing to him. They were simply stepping stones on his path to control. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. The late-night calls, the strange meetings, the sudden obsession with my financial matters. It all made sense now. It wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about power. Alex wanted to take control of my legacy and my life, and he had nearly succeeded. My emotions swung between disbelief, anger, and betrayal. But above all, I felt a burning desire for justice. I had to confront Alex and expose the truth. It was no longer just about my business or my wealth. It was about protecting my integrity and ensuring that this kind of manipulation didn't happen to anyone else. As I lay in that hospital bed, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let Alex get away with this. No matter what it took, I was going to take back control of my life. And I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my godson, destroy everything I had worked for. The battle was just beginning. The weeks following my awakening were a blur. I was consumed by anger and disbelief, my mind racing with thoughts of what Alex had done. I spent hours meeting with Dan, the lawyer who had always been by my side, reviewing the evidence and strategizing our next move. It was clear that I was facing not only a betrayal by my godson, but also an elaborate, coordinated effort to steal everything I had worked for. But this wasn't just a family issue anymore. It was a full-blown legal battle, and I was ready for war. I remember the first time I saw the full scope of Alex's machinations. Dan presented me with the stack of documents, legal forms, financial records, emails, and text messages, each piece of evidence like a nail in the coffin. It was staggering. Alex had gone to extraordinary lengths to set this all up, and he didn't stop there. He had enlisted a network of people to help him execute his plan, and among them were some of the most respected people in my professional circle, people I trusted, people I had built my empire with. This wasn't just a betrayal by one person. It was a conspiracy involving several of my closest business associates. First, there was Jeff, my financial advisor. I had always thought of him as a trusted confidant, someone I could rely on to manage my wealth and investments. But it turned out that Jeff had been feeding Alex confidential information about my finances for years. Emails between the two of them revealed how Jeff had been advising Alex on the best ways to liquidate my assets, diverting funds into accounts Alex controlled. But it didn't stop there. Jeff had even been in contact with Alex's lawyers, laying the groundwork for a legal attack on my estate. His involvement was deeper than I could have ever imagined, and the realization hit me hard. Then there was Dr. Lucas, one of the doctors who had been involved in my care while I was in the coma. He had been treating me for weeks, and I had always trusted him. But now I discovered that Dr. Lucas had been part of the scheme to manipulate my medical treatment. He had been in direct contact with Alex, pushing for a faster recovery timeline so that I would wake up at the right moment for Alex's plan to fall into place. In a disturbing twist, medical records had been altered to reflect a more rapid improvement in my condition than was actually happening. Dr. Lucas had been working with Alex's team to time my recovery in such a way that I would be able to make decisions when Alex needed me to, but not a moment too soon. As if that wasn't enough, Alex had hired a high-powered law firm to help him execute his scheme. The firm had been preparing a series of legal documents that, had I been too weak or disoriented to notice, could have easily been used to strip me of control over my business and personal affairs. They had forged signatures, falsified documents, and had already begun presenting them to key stakeholders in my company. I felt sickened by the thought that Alex had orchestrated all of this behind my back while I lay in a hospital bed, unable to defend myself. With all of this information in hand, Dan and I were ready to take action. We knew we needed to expose the truth, but we also knew this would be a difficult and costly battle. Alex had carefully covered his tracks, and his team of lawyers was formidable. The legal wrangling was going to be intense, and I needed to be prepared for what was coming. Every day I reviewed the evidence, meticulously going over each piece with Dan to make sure we were ready for the inevitable court case. In our strategy sessions, we made sure to focus on one thing: the fraud. The forged signatures, the manipulated medical records, the illegal transfer of assets. All of it pointed to one undeniable truth. Alex had been systematically plotting to take everything from me for years. The legal battle was no longer just about recovering my wealth. It was about exposing the extent of his deception and making sure he was held accountable for his actions. But there were other, darker elements of this plan that began to surface as well. It became clear that Alex wasn't working alone. He had aligned himself with a shadowy group of individuals, lawyers, business associates, even some people in the banking industry, who had helped him with the legal and financial manipulation. These people were not just working for Alex. They were complicit in an ongoing scheme to manipulate and defraud people like me, people who had built businesses and wealth through years of hard work and dedication. I remember the day we found out about the larger network of fraudsters. Dan had uncovered a series of communications between Alex and a group of other people, some of whom were involved in similar fraudulent schemes targeting other wealthy individuals, particularly those in the business world. This wasn't just about Alex trying to take over my assets. It was about him being part of a much larger scam, a criminal enterprise designed to manipulate and steal from people like me. The more we uncovered, the more disturbing it became. This wasn't just a matter of revenge for Alex. It was about power, money, and control, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. With Dan leading the charge, we prepared to confront Alex and his network head-on. I knew that the legal battle would be long and challenging, but I was ready. I had been betrayed by someone I considered family, and I wasn't going to let that slide. I was going to take back control of my life, my business, and my future, and Alex was going to pay for what he had done. It was clear that I was up against a powerful adversary, but I had something he didn't: integrity, resolve, and a determination to fight for what was right. With Dan by my side and the truth on my side, I was ready for whatever came next. The showdown was coming, and I wasn't backing down. The day I finally confronted Alex, I was a mix of emotions: anger, disbelief, and a quiet, unsettling calm. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, consulting lawyers, and planning my approach. It wasn't just about confronting a wayward godson. It was about exposing the deep web of lies and manipulation he had woven around me and everyone I cared about. I knew this was going to be difficult. This wasn't just family, it was personal, it was business, and it was the kind of betrayal that could never be undone. I had hired a private investigator to shadow Alex for weeks. We had gathered enough evidence to fill a dozen legal briefs, and I was certain that everything would come to a head in this single confrontation. Dan, my lawyer, had been there for every step of the legal preparation, but this was different. This was personal. This was about me confronting Alex face to face, exposing the truth that had been hidden for far too long. I arrived at Alex's home just before dusk. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and I felt a sense of unease as I parked my car outside. It wasn't like the old days when Alex would greet me with open arms, laughing, asking about my business deals, and sharing his aspirations. No, this time, there was a palpable tension in the air, a heaviness that seemed to radiate from the very walls of the house. As I approached the front door, I felt a tightness in my chest. I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me wanted to believe that Alex had somehow been misguided or tricked into all of this, that maybe there was some redeeming quality to him still left. But deep down, I knew the truth. He had been plotting for years, manipulating everyone around him, and I was the last one to see it. I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding in my ears. The sound echoed through the house like a final warning, and it didn't take long before I saw Alex's face through the peephole. For a moment, he hesitated, almost as if he was hoping I would just leave, as if this entire confrontation could be avoided. But I wasn't going anywhere. When the door finally opened, I could see the fear in his eyes. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the kind of fear that only comes from being caught, from knowing that the game was up. He stood there, stiff, trying to mask his anxiety with a forced smile, but it was too late. I had already seen through him. "Alex," I began, my voice steady but laced with a cold fury. "We need to talk." His eyes flickered nervously as he took a step back, almost as if he wanted to retreat into the safety of his home. But there was no escape now. He had made his choices, and he was about to face the consequences. "I don't know what you think you know, but this isn't—" Alex started, but I cut him off. "Don't lie to me, Alex," I snapped. "I know everything. The forged documents, the manipulated medical records, the secret bank accounts you set up in my name. I know about the plan to take everything from me, everything I've worked for, and leave me with nothing." For a moment, Alex just stared at me, his face draining of color. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he scrambled to come up with some kind of explanation, some excuse, some justification for what he had done. But there was no excuse. There was no explanation that could make this right. I can explain," Alex stammered, his voice shaky. "I thought it was the only way. I thought you'd be okay with it." "Okay with it?" I barked. "You tried to steal my entire life, Alex. You tried to take control of everything I've built, and for what? For money? For power? You've been lying to me for years, pretending to be the nephew I trusted, the godson I raised, all the while plotting behind my back." Alex's expression shifted, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. He started to backpedal, trying to spin his actions into something justifiable. "You don't understand," he said, his voice now tinged with panic. "I needed this. I thought you'd understand, that you'd want the best for me." I stood my ground, my eyes locked on his. "The best for you? By ruining me? By taking everything I've earned? You've been working with lawyers, doctors, and financial advisors to execute a scheme so elaborate that it could have ruined my entire legacy." His face contorted with fear as the truth started to sink in. He hadn't expected me to know everything. He hadn't expected me to fight back. But I wasn't some naive old man anymore. I was done being manipulated. "I didn't think you'd find out," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible now. "I thought I could control everything before you woke up, before you could make any decisions." The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about money for him. It was about control. He had wanted to control my life, my wealth, and ultimately, my legacy. All of the years I had spent building my empire, all of the relationships I had worked so hard to maintain, meant nothing to Alex. He saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone, someone he could exploit for his own gain. "You've underestimated me, Alex," I said quietly, "and now you're going to pay for it." His face paled even further, and I could see the terror in his eyes. For the first time, I saw Alex for what he truly was, a frightened young man who had gotten in over his head and was now facing the consequences of his own greed. But there was no sympathy left in me for him. He had crossed a line, and now he had to face the consequences. One day, I received a letter from a family that had been affected by Alex's schemes, thanking me for exposing the truth. It felt like a small reward for everything I'd been through. I wasn't just rebuilding my wealth. I was rebuilding myself. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I was stronger and ready for it.